Well, good morning. It's Sex Talk Day. So hope you guys are ready for it. So Marvin Gaye, he needed some serious sexual healing, and so he wrote a whole song about how his pent-up sexual needs had to find a release, and he likened it to a medical procedure, which I thought was really, really brilliant. He mentions that when he's sad or emotionally unstable, he needs sex. And so in order to answer the need, he calls up his honey, and she comes running to help him out. He says, when I get that feeling, I want sexual healing. Some of you are like, now the tune is going to be stuck in my head. Sexual healing makes me feel so fine, helps to relieve my mind, and it is good for me. So he wrote a 3-point sermon on sexual healing. I decided to do something similar. Mine's 13 points, but we're going to do something similar to it. Now, the thing is, I think we all actually long for sexual healing, and sexual healing is good for us. So all together now, I'd like us just to say all together out loud, I want sexual healing. Ready? Let's do it. I want sexual healing. You did better than I thought, or at least half of you did better. The other half we'll keep building up. So, but where do we find it? You're going to find it in the arms of our honey? Is that the plan? Maybe some friends with benefits? Maybe your own self-expression. Whatever it is that you feel like you need is what you're going to go after. How's that working for us? For my part, I think the Bible is a more reliable source for sexual healing. And so what does the Bible say about it? Now, before we get started, I want to we're going to look at this idea of sexual healing from a few different vantage points, not the vantage point of those who have experienced sexual trauma. Even though I'm using this language, this isn't a message about those who have experienced sexual trauma, but we would love to be able to help and encourage and support those of you who have experienced that. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at this idea from a few different vantage points that remind us of the biblical position and the biblical posture. It's going to be a nice broad overview of the position and the posture with an emphasis on the LGBTQ community. And so as we get into this, I just wanted to remind us, I think it's helpful for us to know that it's time, we got to be chill. All right, can we just agree to be chill? This is going to be a difficult topic. We're going to disagree. I'm going to say some things that might hurt or offend or confuse some or all of you at some point in the morning. That's just the nature of what we're trying to do this morning. And so you might actually feel offended, or I might sound like I'm trying to be offensive. I'm not. And I'm just asking that you would trust me in that I'm not. I'm actually trying not to be. All of us, we all have friends and family who have wrestled with or are wrestling with sexual sin, and some who are gay, some here may very well be same-sex attracted. And so if you're here this morning and you're experiencing gender dysphoria, I'm asking that all of the rest of you know that and be chill. And also be kind. I think that much of Christendom has been harsh and critical when it comes to sexual sin and people who struggle in this area, especially the LGBTQ community, against the LGBTQ community. And so I am very sorry for what people have done and said under the banner of Christianity. It seems that we find it difficult to disagree without being disagreeable. And this is unfortunate and heartbreaking. Now, as far as the language that I use this morning, I'm kind of a work in progress on this. And so maybe I should be apologizing up front, because today I'll be referring to same-sex attraction, I'll be referring to gays, or the queer community, or LGBTQ, and I don't intend any of these to be offensive terms, and I'm actually trying to use them according to the best practices that I have been told are the least offensive terms that I can use. And so I've heard that the term homosexual and even transgenderism to a large part of the community is offensive, so I'm working at getting them out of my lexicon, but I am a work in progress on this. And then I'm just asking that we be open, because there is no doubt that there, right, we have to, so I think it's helpful to admit this, that there are many of us Christians who have plenty to learn when it comes to understanding those who live with some different sexual convictions. And for those on the other side, I think being open could allow you to consider some things that maybe you haven't before, that maybe the Bible isn't a book of hate, that maybe God actually has a fantastic plan and a whole lot to say about sexuality that you would want to consider. And so let's jump right in. The first vantage point is those sexual healing for Christians and anyone else who grew up a prude. So the historic church has not served us well in this. The church was birthed into the Greco-Roman culture that was very much at odds with a biblical sexual ethic. And many in the first centuries of the church, and even for another 1,000 years, became almost overreactive to sexual sin and really did overreact in a whole lot of different ways. And so Augustine, he was one of the early church fathers and brilliant in so many ways, but when he got to this area, one of the things, the guilt and shame that he felt from his own past sexual sin led him down the road of saying that sex is only meant for procreation, that outside of that, it's sin, even within a marriage. And you kind of look at that and you scratch your head a little bit. It's like, it seems like a whole lot of nerve endings to get us there. But then you get a guy like Jerome, one of the great biblical translators. I mean, incredible mind. He believed that if you made love to your spouse too passionately, you might be an adulterer. What? Like, what in the world is going on here? So one of the historians of the church, they kind of they ran some numbers for us. I thought it was pretty interesting. They said that let's assume that as a Christian spouse, that you have 365 opportunities a year to have sex with your spouse. That would be, one time a day. You can always double up, highly recommended, but let's just assume that's the baseline, right? 365, that's where you start. Well, it wasn't long before they said, Thursdays, it's when Jesus was arrested. That really should be off the table. And Fridays, of course, that was, that was with the cross. So clearly, Saturdays should be reserved for the Virgin Mary. So Virgin Mary, obviously you guys should avoid Saturday. Sundays, because we have so many other things to do on the Sabbath, we should definitely avoid that. And then there's 40-day periods, fasts of Lent, and a couple others scattered throughout the year. And so one historian said that you could have sex with your spouse 44 days a year as long as it lacked any passion. That's what, and some of you are like, 44 days? Sign me up. But you would never hit the biblical minimums found in Leviticus. And so how 44 just wouldn't cut it. Some of you guys are going to be downloading the Bible app right now, I haven't read Leviticus in a while. I'm going to go read. The point is, these guys, many of them were major prudes. But God actually loves sex. And we've got to get this in our minds. The book of Proverbs, it says, drink water from your own cistern. Metaphorical language going on here, so let your mind run a little. Running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed. You guys, we could do an exegetical study if you want. We can go kind of word by word on some of these, or we can just anyway. May your fountain be blessed. May you rejoice in the wife of your youth, and may her breasts satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. This is Proverbs. This is the wisdom literature. This isn't even Song of Solomon kinds of stuff or other metaphors used throughout the scriptures that God, and then just think of the creation. So God created us, and it's like he pulled out all the stops when it came to sex. The number of nerve endings and pleasure centers found in the human creature are unprecedented. The lack of any sort of physical or seasonal restrictions. It's like God made us abundantly and excessively well endowed as sexual creatures. It's like he loved it. He couldn't get enough of this idea, which also makes so much sense because he created sex in such a way that it would point us toward a mysterious union. And so if you think about this perfect and beautiful sexual relationship between a husband and a wife and the often sometimes transcendent moments that we can experience in the midst of sex, God said, I created all of those things to teach you about me, to show you who I am and what it's like that one day this kind of passion and this kind of a singularity of focus, this sort of transcendence is actually pointing you toward me, the kind of relationship that you and I are going to have with passion and with this sort of unity, making the two one flesh. Again, God says that's what my plan was for all of this. And so he's made sex sacred in this way. Now, eyes up front here for a minute. Does your marriage reflect this attitude? Eyes up front, do not look awkwardly left or right. Does it reflect it? Because when you think about our own tendencies and what gets wrapped up and how we get wrapped up in our heads and the shame and the guilt and everything we feel that has been enforced upon us by our culture or by our families, our background, our experiences, Christians above all people can have the most exciting and shame-free and authentic and fulfilling sex lives. Do you? Sexual healing for those of us who know better than God. All right, I'm going to meddle a little bit here, but it's based on an idea that is found all throughout the Bible, but this is the Apostle Paul talking to his mentee, Timothy, and he says, but God's truth stands firm. And so whatever we hold to has to be rooted in the truth of the scriptures. God's truth stands firm. It's like a foundation stone with this inscription, all who belong to the Lord must turn away from evil. And so he links truth and holiness. He links truth with being a firm foundation upon which we get to build the rest of our lives. So God's truth is what sets it apart. And when you belong to the Lord, it is going to entail that you turn away from evil. And this is found, I'm picking one of hundreds of different places in the scriptures we could talk about this value. But then he takes a little bit of a pivot here, and I just think it's a beautiful thing. We see this time and again in the Bible. In a wealthy home, some utensils are made of gold and silver, and some are made of wood and clay. The expensive utensils are used for special occasions, and the cheap ones are for everyday use. If you keep yourself pure, you will be a special utensil for honorable use. He's saying, listen, you want to know why I'm calling you to this truth? It's not because God's a great cosmic killjoy. It's because God actually has a better plan for you. He's going to make you into a special utensil for honorable use. Your life will be clean, and you'll be ready for the master to use you for every good work. So he's saying, yes, this is true. God's truth, it's going to mean you run away from what he calls evil, but he's doing that because he has amazing plans for you. And then he goes right after it. Run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts, even bringing us into the reality and the value of community. So now here's the thing. Every single culture has taboos on sex. Now stick with me here for just a moment, because this is kind of a conceptual idea that I have found important in my own way of thinking about this. So if you go across the whole of the world, the taboos, the boundaries that different cultures, different people groups, different tribes put around sex, the guardrails that they put around sex differ. Many of them agree. A lot of them, they talk about adultery. A lot of them talk about, different kinds of attraction or ages or family member, close relationships. But think about this. Nothing in biology mandates that. So you just follow the animal kingdom. You want to see how violent the animal kingdom can be when it comes to sex. Go just take a little dive and see the kinds of things that happen in the animal kingdom. But you see, they don't have any structures or restrictions because they're animals. But we do. but not rooted in biology, because we can do whatever we want when it comes from a purely biological standpoint. Nothing keeps us from having sex with multiple partners or any gender or children or relatives or even animals. There is no reason in biology to restrict any forms of sexual expression. And yet every culture around the world does. Why? Because it's rooted in our hearts that sex is more than a biological act. It's rooted in our hearts. It's somehow deep inside of us that this is something different. It's something sacred, and we've got to protect it. And even in our fallen attempts at protecting it, we see it universal around the world and throughout history, some forms of restriction and boundaries. But which boundaries are right? The U.S. Congress? Because they got it all figured out? I don't think so. Hollywood? Nope. Whose boundaries? Something from an ivory tower professor, a hippie that made it through the sexual revolution? Some religious prude? You want them setting all of the boundaries apart from God's? You? Me? Who sets the boundaries? I vote for the Bible's sexual ethic. I think it is profoundly redemptive when we understand it in its context. And so Jackie Hill Perry, she is a same-sex attracted Christian woman. She is brilliant, and she wrestled with this idea. I want to show you a little bit of that.
Eyes and desire to make one wise. I think you saw the beginning of someone choosing to allow their affections to define what goodness is. And so I think when I was born into an ancestry of that kind of doubt, if you will, like believing and feeling as if my feelings should be authoritative over and above the Word of God. But before I even learned all that, I think I didn't start to notice my same-sex desires until, I don't know, kindergarten. I knew it was before I knew how to spell my name that I could identify that I liked girls in the same way that girls liked boys. There wasn't a name for it because this is early 90s, and so there wasn't all this exposure, I think, to LGBTQ issues. Or from the looks of it, it looks as if culture really wants us to believe that we have the autonomy to decide what we do with our bodies and how we understand our identities, which is not new in the sense that's what started in the garden. If you eat of this fruit, you will be like God. You will have the freedom to choose who you want to be and what you do. And I think we just see the fruits of that scattered throughout society. It's just the echo of the evil one in the culture. And so it feels right. It sounds true. It sounds just. But I think it doesn't take into account the fact that we are finite and that we are mutable and that we just have a heart that is deceitful above all things. And so my understanding of myself is even flawed. Your understanding of yourself is even flawed. But there's a God who understands everything through and through, who created us. I really do think he's smarter than us in what he says about gender and sex and identity. And he's also authoritative because he created sex. He created the body. And so I have to, if I'm a wise person, submit to the creator of the body and how the body should behave and function. Again, this takes faith. It's not natural. It's counterintuitive to say, let me trust in an unseen being for what I should do with the body that I can feel and taste and touch and smell. But I think, again, we continue to see how it plays out when we are the masters of ourselves. It never leads to life. It consistently leads to death.
So what is sexual immorality according to the scriptures? Well, any sexual behavior that is outside of God's plan for human flourishing. God intended sex for a man and a woman in a monogamous relationship until death do they part. And so it's as simple as that, not simple to live by or apply, but it's as simple as that to understand. And anything that falls outside of that is, according to the scriptures, truth, which is the follower of Christ's truth, sexual immorality, adultery, unjustified divorce, open marriages, serial monogamy, any sex outside of marriage, multiple partners, and sex within marriage that is violent or involves degradation or high risk to health, pornography, prostitution, sexual fantasy novels, TV shows with sex scenes. All of these violate God's awesome plan and purpose for sex. If you remember the old baseball metaphor, second and third base, and probably most of first base, all violate God's awesome plan and purpose for sex. Sex between men, sex between women, sex with close relatives, all violate God's awesome plan and purpose for sex. You just read through the scriptures. You'll find this in a whole variety of different texts, dozens and dozens and dozens, just laid out, not usually exclusively by themselves, usually in long lists of things, like gossip and murder and greed. And so all these they show up in all of these long lists grouped together, which is part of the reason why it's so easy for some of us to really talk about these in what can feel a little bit coarse, a little bit harsh, a little bit uncaring, because those of us who have followed Christ for any amount of time have seen our own sin countless times. We've seen them in these lists. We've continued to struggle and bring this back to Jesus time and time and time again. And so pride and greed and envy and all of these things, they become just a normal part of our continual daily struggle against sin. And sexual sin for us is lumped in with a whole big group of struggles and trials that we continue to face. So any guardrails that God erects around sex are for our greatest good. And God is asking us to trust him. Now, we can offer a verse-by-verse discussion of every single one of these Bible verses, and we certainly can do that. Maybe at the Q&A later we can do some of those. We just can't do it this morning. But for those who want to take it a little bit deeper, one of the authors that I have been reading lately is Sam Allberry. This is the guy who I think Tim Keller chose to be part of his own memorial service. Sam is a brilliant theologian. He is writing right now super concise but still thorough treatments on a whole host of these topics. This one is why does God care who I sleep with? Another one I think is God anti-gay? But Sam isn't just brilliant and concise, which makes him awesome in my book. But Sam has the added benefit of speaking from his own same-sex attraction. And so he lives as a celibate man, and he writes and speaks with significant understanding and empathy, and is helping many of us understand these conversations more. All right, how about sexual healing for those who are sick and tired of all this gay stuff? All right, so can we touch for a few moments? I want to talk about this because I was raised in a far more gay, hostile culture. Not sexual sin. That was some of it, especially when I was younger, and the parents and youth pastors was all like, just stop it, don't, stay away. But that wasn't that we sort of understood, that we applied that to ourselves, and there was always mixed in there some grace and some forgiveness, even in the more holiness kind of culture I was raised in. But there was definitely a hostility toward the gay community. And I think it's still out there in many circles. And so to be quite and fully open and transparent with you, it is still difficult for me, with my cultural background, to speak of heterosexual sexual sin in the same exact way as I talk of gay sexual sin. It's harder for me to have compassion and empathy on the struggles that trans people face. I get all riled up when I read an article about a trans swimmer or a weightlifter crushing all of the records that women worked hard for, or when a trans kid is allowed in the locker room of the opposite sex. These are hard for me. But I want to do better. I want to do better. The same passage in Timothy, just a little bit set apart from it, it says, again, I say, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone and be able to teach and be patient with difficult people. Gently instruct those who oppose the truth. Perhaps God will change those people's hearts and they'll learn the truth. This is who I want to be. I don't want to be someone who quarrels. I want to treat everyone with kindness. I want to be patient. I want to be able to teach. That doesn't mean just knowing the truth. It's how to communicate the truth. I want to be able to do that for people that are different from me, that people that I would consider difficult, who might even be argumentative, who might be continuing in a lifestyle that I don't approve of. I want to be able to gently instruct even those who oppose the truth. Perhaps God will change those people. It's removing the burden from me. See, I want to engage in this culture war in such a way that my citizenship in heaven far outweighs any citizenships I have here. That's the one it's my citizenship in heaven. Jesus, he risked his reputation with religious people in order to love the marginalized and the sinner. That's who Jesus was. That's who I want to be. I want to learn how to relate to people different from me, people that Jesus desperately loves. You know, there are all sorts of issues and debates. There's public policies, and there's going to be school board meetings, and there's decisions about what streaming services to let in your house. Now you got to decide if I'm still going to shop at Target, and you know what kind of beer I'm supposed to boycott, and all of this. There's all sorts of issues and debates and political things that we need to kind of figure out and think about, and these are all complex, and they take great wisdom, and they take great patience. Except the beer one. That was like a give me. Like, we should have boycotted Bud Light years ago just because it's a terrible and lousy beer. But like that, I don't even understand that one. But so this whole thing, this is more than a political issue. It is that. And you guys are going to have to work your way through a whole lot of those kinds of things and figure out what you're going to do as a community and as parents. And as long as we're Christians, we're still doing it all in the way that best represents Christ. But, you know, this is more than a political issue. This is about real people with names and with families and with stories and with pain. It's not just an issue. Jesus, he never ran from hard truths. And he was also a master at compassion, who reserved his harshest words for the religious people who thought that they had everything figured out. When Jesus encounters the hurting, those who are far from God, what does he do? The broken, the confused, even people who are in flagrant sin. What does Jesus do? He moves closer. He moves closer to them. He sees them. He hears their stories. He touches them. Occasionally, he heals them. And he loves them so sacrificially that he dies in their place. Sexual healing for the LGBTQ community. And I speak about this with fear and trepidation in many ways because it is so difficult for me to speak with any sort of experience with this except for those based in the conversations I've had with people in the queer community. And so this is a little bit, I'm getting pretty far afield from my wheelhouse here, but what I'm not talking, but I do think that the queer community can experience sexual healing in Jesus. And I'm not talking about conversion therapy or trying to pray the gay away or anything so trite or offensive as that. But I do think that trust in God's word and having the support of a loving Christian tribe can help you carry the heavy cross that God has placed upon you. I think in Jesus, you can discover that your identity isn't found in something as transient as gender or sex. Who you are attracted to and how you have sinned aren't your identity. And if you trust and surrender and obey Jesus, then nothing can separate you from his love. And so the many same-sex attracted and gender dysphoric Christians who are now writing and speaking and traveling and communicating more and more of what their lived experiences are. They have their own story and they have their own struggle. I mentioned already Sam Alberry as one of them, and Jackie Hill Perry, and many of you might be familiar with Rosario Butterfield's story. Now, all of them are different stories, and they all head in different directions. There are countless thousands of same-sex attracted and gender dysphoric followers of Jesus who are showing us the way toward sexual healing. Now, what specifically, and this is back in my wheelhouse a little bit, can Beacon do? How can Beacon help bring sexual healing to the LGBTQ community? And this is what we mean when we're talking about posture shift. In fact, one of the reasons we wedged this message today into this other series that we were doing is because of posture shift. We'd sent out a training for many of our folks here at Beacon, our leaders, people who are working with the kids and youth especially, and we sent it out, some training videos discussing the biblical posture toward the LGBTQ community, the trans community. And so and this isn't like some corporate kind of woke thing that some of you might have experience with. I'm not saying that all those things are bad or everything they say is bad. I'm saying that's not what this is. What this is trying to reestablish for us what is both the biblical position and the biblical posture that we as followers of Jesus ought to have as this sort of cultural shift and change is happening all around us. How do we as a church rightly respond? And so it's about holding to the biblical position on sexual ethics while developing a more biblical posture for those who are caught up in sexual sin. So what are some of the shifts that we as a church are learning? Well, posture shift one, I think we have to expunge the ex-gay script from our hearts. This is one that's deep in me for sure. I felt like the best thing for a gay person is to no longer be gay. Be straight, fake it till you make it. All of these sorts of things. And when you talk to people in the gay community, especially those who have journeyed many, many years with Jesus, and this becomes one of their ongoing struggles, many of them will tell us time and again that there isn't going to be a cure, or it doesn't seem like most of them will be cured the way that we like to think. And so this is very challenging for many of us because we just sort of hope that they will be cured. But my grandfather, he was like 90 years old, and he was making some comment about one of the nurses and maybe a sponge bath or something that he was. And anyway, I was like, Grandpa, so tell me, when does lust for a man end? And he's like, I don't know. I'll let you know when it happens. Like, he's 90 plus years old in the hospital. And I was like, I can't even understand. The point is he going to be cured, or is this going to be just an epic battle that he'll continue with until it's less and less an epic battle? And so I think we have to kind of expunge a little bit of this ex-gay script from our hearts. I think for us, we can focus more on care and support and offering the rightful forgiveness that Jesus offers for those who are pursuing him. Posture shift number 2, be careful of establishing heterosexual marriage as the end-all and be-all of relational life. I think this is worthy of a whole other talk, but I think there's near idolatry about marriage in the Christian church, and I think there can even be threads of it here at Beacon. But whatever happened to like sisterhood and brotherhood being the key and vital relationships for us? Why does it have to be that until you're married and you have that relationship, you're sort of incomplete? Like, where did we get this? Where did we buy into this lie from? What about deep friendships like David and Jonathan? And what about friends that are closer than your blood, like according to the Proverbs, right? Singleness and celibacy. What happened? How did they become something that was like, oh, well, maybe one day you'll get something better? When did that become a thing? Like, when did we think that the way Jesus did it and Paul did it is inferior? Like, what happened? How come we can't create space and even admiration and respect? I think this is a problem, and a shift needs to be made. Posture shift number 3. I think we got to be careful to not reinforce societal stereotypes that aren't biblical. And this is a difficult one, because when I grew up, we mocked the boys who took theater classes, because we knew if they're taking theater, they're gay. So we wouldn't use the word gay. It was much harsher back then. Now, today, all of my boys had theater while they were in high school. Like, when I grew up, you could be in a rock band, but you couldn't be in marching band unless you played the tuba or the big drum. But like, there were all of these sort of stereotypes, right? If you played anything other than that, it's like, I'm not really so sure. These are stereotypes that we have, right? The blue for boys and red and pink for girls, and these are stereotypes that are not biblical. But back then, all of my friends, my parents, teachers, we did everything we could to keep gays in the closet. Bullying, name calling, all of it. This is a reality of where many of us have come from, and it was so often based on stereotypes, pushing people, not allowing boys and girls to have the freedom of self-expression without saying, oh, you must be not how you were born. I think we need to do better at this. This is actually what's going on right now, right? I mean, the kids are being pushed in one direction or another based on overriding societal stereotypes, not biblical distinctions between man and woman. But the Bible has this wide range of behaviors that men and women can participate in. You could play the harp and kill a giant. That's pretty cool. Like if you were a woman in the scriptures, you could actually be sewing up some garments over here, and then you can go buy and sell some businesses over here. You could become an international textile trader. That's the gender roles, male and female, found in the scriptures. You could be tenderly raising your kids one day, and then you could be driving a tent peg through an enemy's head. But that might not be the best example for today. But a woman could do that and get accolades. We don't have this. We got to restore some of the beauty of the diversity. Posture shift 4, we can work toward a posture of love and curiosity rather than fear and judgment. And I think this means we're going to be listening to actual gay and trans people. Now, I could already hear the question, mostly because Cheryl, my wife, is always asking me, yes, but when do you confront people about their sin? And this is a great question. When do you confront people with their sin? And the thing is, I don't know. So every once in a while, we'll get a couple that'll come to the church. They'll fill out a connection card. They have different last names. They live at the same address, and there's no wedding ring. Sherlock here figures out that they're probably not married. And if I find out that they're followers of Jesus, then what? When do I confront them? The next Sunday? Do you want me to stop them at the door? Like, should I stop them before the end of the service? Hey guys, I'm sorry. Can we just talk to a couple over there in the back? We want to talk to you about your choices in sex today. I think most of you go, that's ludicrous, Robert. At some point, though, in Christian discipleship, you'll have a conversation. But when? I don't know. I mean, when the Spirit leads? Maybe when the relationship supports it? Maybe when the pathway demands it? I don't know. but I do know it happens. I do know it's a part of what we do as a community. But it doesn't feel like something that we can simply set easy timelines on. But one of the long-term goals of Christian discipleship is for all Jesus followers to see their biological sex as a gift from a good God and as part of their identity. And that would entail eventually even using pronouns that match their God-given gender. That would be an amazing goal for someone struggling with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. But when does that have to take place? What's the timeline you want to force on them? And I think that brings up a good conversation, because the posture shift number 5 here is to learn the love languages of the LGBTQ community. I think this is important for us. This one's really hard for me, by the way, because it really irritates me, if I'm being completely honest with you. I don't want to keep learning the language and the words and the things I got to shift and how I got to learn. It just irritates me. Yeah, but you're being me and you're saying these things. I know that, and it irritates me that I have to do this. I'm not saying that's right or good. I'm just saying this is what's inside. The irony is I'm being hypocritical in this, because I actually already have taught many of people how important it is for love languages, right? So we hand this out to couples and we go, hey guys, this is the big book. This is like the 67th book of the Bible for Christians in marriage, right? We're like, you got to learn the love languages. And because if you're a husband and your love language is physical touch, and your wife, her love language is any of the other 4 that you don't even know what they are, but it's one of the other ones, like quality time or acts of service or words of affirmation. And if that's gifts giving, if it's one of yours, then you say, oh, but you guys have to do this. You got to learn what the other's love language is, because the thing is, you're going to be giving love in the way that you want to receive love. And we all know, we've all heard this before. That means that they're not going to feel loved. In fact, they might feel unloved unless you're understanding who they are. By the way, it's not just in marriages. We talk about this among friends, and how you can relate to each other and better understand and express who you are and who they are, and feel appreciated by others in the way that you need to be understood and appreciated, or that comes most naturally to you. We talk about it when it comes to children. There's 5 love languages for kids, which is probably like 35 love languages for kids. Is probably a much harder book to get through. But then there's managers talk about this. How can I relate? And so it's like in every other area of life, I'm totally comfortable with this. And I think it's super valuable. And as soon as it comes to the LGBTQ community, I'm like, oh, that irritates me. I don't want to. Why? Why? I don't understand it. I think the principle does apply to the queer community. And I think that you can fight all you want on the prevailing use of language in the culture, okay? Go ahead and fight all you want, I guess. If you feel like that's really what God has called you to, make sure you know that that's what God has called you to, though, please. But it's like you're looking at this thing and you're like, well, you can't take sex and gender and separate them. It's never been that way before in all of history. We're going to fight until you bring the meaning of sex and the meaning of gender back together. You can try to do that. I don't think you'll win. I think that ship has already sailed. But I will tell you this, it's not going to help you to talk to the trans community. If the term homosexual is offensive, then I will try not to use it. If misgendering kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria makes them want to peel their skin off and self-harm, I'm gonna figure out other ways to help them without forcing this experience on them. But I mentioned pronouns, and this is the case study I just want to spend a moment here with you on, because here's the thing. This is a difficult issue. Not even the LGBTQ community agrees on it. And I want to see just how many more people I can irritate this morning. And so, no, that's not really why I'm doing it. I'm not, honestly. But it's an important example, and it serves as a case study for all of the other 50, 60, 100 issues like this one that we're going to have to address. So there's a whole group of Christians, very, very smart Christians, very wise biblical scholars, the whole thing, who say you absolutely must use a pronoun that matches how a person was born. To do otherwise is to lie. Christians don't lie. And to do otherwise is to play into this whole leftist structure and system of changing language to obliterate what's, the biblical traditional sexual ethic. And so we got to be very, very careful. We can't do that. We can't be a part of it. And besides, it's virtue signaling and it's political correctness gone haywire. And so they have all of these reasons. And if you use it, you're reinforcing the lie and you're encouraging people and kids to continue in these lies. One side of it. Some good arguments. What are they trying to do? They're trying to take biblical principles as best they understand it and apply it to difficult situations. Then there's another group of Christians who say, no, it's better for us to practice pronoun hospitality. It's not lying. No one really is going to believe that you are lying and that you accept everything about them and everything they believe and everything they know, especially about things you haven't talked to them about. Pronoun hospitality is simply you showing respect. You want to know what people think when you use their pronouns that they present to you? They think this person might be safe to talk to. That's at least what many of the people who had been interviewed about this say. This is what it is. I think this is a person that might be safe to talk to. Now, what do you do? What do you do? Where do you land? You got to land somewhere on these things. Wisdom has to be applied as best you can to this and dozens and dozens and dozens of other kinds of examples. So at Beacon, we've come up with a posture on this particular issue. We use the names and the pronouns that are presented to us. We don't think it's sin. We don't think it's forbidden in the Bible. We think it's showing kindness and respect, which are wildly important biblical values. We're not saying that we agree with the direction that the country is headed in all of this, or that parents should lose their kids when, under child abuse statutes, if they fail to gender their kids as the kids want them to. We're not saying anything about that at all. We're saying that when a kid shows up to youth group, what is our posture going to be toward that kid? What's our posture going to be? This feels like a softball to us. This feels like an easy way to begin building rapport, building relationship, and not being offensive out of the gate. See, this isn't simply a political conversation. For us, it isn't a political conversation at all. It's a missional posture conversation. Now, churches are going to disagree. God bless you. Christians are going to disagree. God bless you. We're all trying to figure this out. We're all trying to figure out and this is just the very beginning. There are tons of other kinds of questions, practical ones. What group, men, girls, or boys, do you put trans kids in? What tents do they get to sleep in at missions training? All of these require careful thought, wisdom, humility. And if people disagree, then we disagree. Let's talk it through and try to figure it out, and all of us can come to a better place and a better understanding of how to apply these things. And there are so many great questions to discuss. What leadership roles at Beacon are restricted and why? What about rapid onset gender dysphoria? Is it real? Why is it impacting so many girls? What about the detransitioners who are all coming online and saying, listen, guys, from a non-Christian point of view, this was a terrible idea. We shouldn't be doing hormone therapy treatment. What do we do with the detransitioners? And how can that help us get to a better understanding of what God would have us to do? And we can cover a whole lot more of these kinds of topics during the Q&A after the congregational meeting today. But I wanted to end this part with just Preston Sprinkle is a guy that we've been doing a bit of reading on, and he said it like this. He's great. He's written some unbelievably compassionate books on these topics, including a really thick one just on transgender issues, which I think for anyone who has been wanting to think and learn more about it, I think you're going to really appreciate what Preston is saying. But here's one of the things that he said that really stuck with me. He said, there's plenty of fodder for outrage, but outrage doesn't change the world. Love changes the world. Getting furious at our cultural moment doesn't convince people of the truth. Our truth will not be heard until our grace is felt, because the greatest apologetic for truth is love. I'm going to invite the band out. They're going to come as we go to the Lord's table. And so if you have the elements there, if you don't, you can go grab some from the table in the back. And I read this quote from Preston, and it reminds me that there was a great outrage in the world. It was God's outrage at sin. Why? Because he created you and he created me to be these perfect images and to live in the fullness of our humanity. And sin breaks that down. And so God, he's angry at sin in the world. And that causes us to run from God. And God's like, no, that wasn't, I'm dealing with the sin issue. I'll deal with it. God himself will provide a sacrifice. And on the cross, he pours out his wrath at sin and at evil, at rebellion. He pours out his wrath on Jesus so that we could walk in the newness of life. We come to the table of communion, and this is what we recognize: that Jesus paid the price for our sin and our rebellion so that we could be brought back into the family of God, that we could walk with him in the cool of the garden, that we could experience his love, and we could be free from shame and guilt, and that we can do that for all of eternity if we will follow and trust him. The night that he was betrayed, he took the bread. He broke it, knowing this was the representation of his body that was soon to be broken, marked, scarred, beaten. The body of Christ that was shed, that was broken for your sin and for my sin. Take, eat. They're celebrating the Passover dinner, and he takes one of the cups. And he says, this is the blood of the new covenant. The old covenant, it was found inadequate to bring people fully and completely back to God. They needed a new heart, and it was secured through the shed blood of Jesus. May God grant us new hearts. Take and drink. Father, we ask that you would make these truths ever more real to each and every one of us. Give us your wisdom and insight in all of these things. We're asking, Lord, for your mercy and your compassion and your love to overflow from us into the lives of people all around us, people that you desperately love. We pray it all in Christ's name. Amen.